Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. Boy, does it feel like an eternity since I did my last one, but here we are, I'm back, and for those of you who are new to my channel, I'm Annie, your Silicon Valley Sage Sister, here to bring consciousness to the forefront of your daily life to make life a little kinder and simpler. And for those of you returning, welcome back. So I thought to get back in the swing of things, I would do a video by special request. So that is why we are talking about the universal laws today. Now, before I get into the specific laws that I'm going to talk about, which I have here on my handy dandy list, I thought I would mention the fact that not everyone, not all spiritual traditions, not all mystical traditions agree on necessarily how many universal laws there are. Some believe that there are hundreds. The Hermetic principles, for instance, only talk about 7 of them. The fourth way, they believe that there are 96 and that we on Earth are subject to 48 of them. So I thought that I would today talk about the universal laws that I have found most agree upon are universal laws, and the ones that I have found most intuitively and naturally in my own life, and therefore have taught the most in my teachings, in spiritually teaching others. So the first universal law that I want to get into is the law of accident. And this is one that I've talked about in other videos. And this universal law is that universal law that we experience the most when we're asleep. It's that universal law that makes us feel like everything is happening to us. It's that universal law that makes us feel like, why me? And it's the universal law that informs us as to why it's so important to have mindfulness practices in our spiritual practices. Because the more consciously we live, the more mindfully we live, the more awakened we become, the less we are subject to the law of accident. That experiencing on autopilot of the feeling that everything is happening to us. So that brings me to the Hermetic principles, which I have a whole playlist on each individual Hermetic principle. I talk about them one by one, but I thought I would touch on them today for just a moment because they inform the other universal laws that I want to talk about afterwards. So the first universal law that is spoken about in the Hermetic principles is the universal law of mentalism, that basically reminds us that everything is in the mind. And that leads to the universal law or principle of correspondence, which is as above, so below. Everything is, in the grand scheme of things, experienced through the mind, the same, made up of the same things. So if we want to understand the universe at large, we have to first understand ourselves, and vice versa. This brings us to the universal law or Hermetic principle of vibration, which is that everything is made of vibrations, or everything is vibration, and therefore everything is in motion, and things do vibrate at different frequencies, but everything is made up of oscillating energy grids that are vibrating. This brings us to the law of polarity, which I find talking about polarity and rhythm a little backwards, but I'm going to do these in the order of how they are presented in the Kabbalion or the Hermetic principles. So, being that everything is vibrating, everything vibrates between 2 points. So, that gets us into the principle of rhythm, or the universal law of rhythm, that being that everything is vibrating, and being that everything is vibrating between 2 points, everything in motion is going to be moving between these 2 points. So everything is going to have that pendulum experience of highs and lows, ebbs and flows. The next universal law is that of cause and effect, because, and some call this karma, there is a cause and effect to everything. In order for something to be in motion, in order for there to be an effect to happen, it has to be set in motion. There has to be a cause and therefore an effect. We do not get an effect without its cause. Last but not least, when it comes to the Hermetic principles, they talk about the universal law of gender, which tells us that in everything, both divine masculine and divine feminine are expressed or manifested. Now, this is important because it brings us to the universal law of three. Now, the universal law of three is a universal law that I have studied in the deepest traditions that I have studied. So it has come up in Rosicrucianism, in the Fourth Way, in the Karo tradition, to name a few. And the universal law of three tells us, some call it the universal law of the triangle, that three forces are required to transmute energy, because nothing is created, nothing is destroyed. Everything is the transmutation of energy, and it is the three forces coming together. Some call it positive, negative, and neutral, or neutralizing. Some call it masculine, feminine, and spirit. Whatever you call it, in order to manifest or transmute energy, three forces must come together. Now, this is important in spiritual life in general, because whether or not you're fond of the word manifesting, that is what we're doing. We are manifesting our life through cause and effect, through the law of cause and effect, through karma in that sense, because karma is not necessarily good or bad. It is just, karma is basically the effect of the cause. So the law of three is important because it teaches us that it does not just require two forces like the sperm and the egg, but the womb as well to manifest things. That just happens to be the most common example given, is the sperm, the egg, and the womb. It does not just require positive and negative, but a neutral force as well to transmute energy, to manifest things. Now, this brings me to the law of seven, because we have what we call the Enneagram, which is the law of three and the law of seven coming together. And though I'm not going to talk long about the law of seven, I do feel like it is important to mention, because if you imagine manifesting your best life, or manifesting anything in general, like wanting to make a cake, the law of three is like having the ingredients or the tools, and the law of seven is like having the instructions or recipe. So if you really want to start learning to manifest with intention, and not just haphazardly or by accident, just happening to sometimes get what you want and sometimes not, understanding the law of seven, studying it, the Enneagram is how they come together, and the Fourth Way is how I would recommend learning more about this, though there are a couple other ways. Understanding these laws are really what allow you to, as someone who is spiritually inclined, spiritually attuned, how this comes together is what helps you really start to manifest anything, including your entire life, with intention. So next I want to talk about the law of attraction, because if everything is vibrating, and everything is vibrating at a frequency, the law of attraction then informs us that we attract the frequency that we vibrate at. We attract what we are. So if you want to attract different things, that's why they talk about raising your vibration in spirituality so often, or being a vibrational match to things and manifesting. Because if you want different things to be happening in your life, you have to vibrate at a different frequency to attract different things. Last but not least is the law of abundance. And this one goes hand in hand with the law of attraction, because it's not just about receiving, it's about giving. It's about the sacred reciprocity that is the flow of abundance, that rules the flow of abundance in the world, in our universe, in all the dimensions, spiritual and physical. So if you want to not just feel abundant, but actually experience the flow of abundance. It's not just enough to know that we attract what we are. We have to know that, and this is why being of service is so important in spiritual traditions, because to really live in the flow, you have to be able to give without the expectation of receiving, to receive the most, to be the most in the flow. Because the universal law of abundance is so, it permeates our universe. It is the flow that people are trying to go with. So the more you can be of service without the expectation of being given something back in return, the more you can actually receive and be abundant. But the more you just focus on the law of attraction and not about sacred reciprocity, the more you're actually going to cut yourself off from receiving. Because if you're just focused on receiving and not focused equally, at least equally, on giving, on being of service, you cut yourself off from that flow. You stop that flow from being able to flow. And therefore, you wind up with a stagnant pool of mosquito energy rather than a nice, beautiful, flowing river energy. All right, guys. Those are the important spiritual laws to get acquainted with as someone who is spiritually awake or spiritually awakening. Just to go over them, I talked about the law of accident. Then I got into the Hermetic principles, which once again, I do have a whole playlist where I get into each individual Hermetic principle in detail. Those are the principles or universal laws of mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect or karma, and gender. I also talked about the law of 3, the law of 7, how those come together in the Enneagram. And not, when I talk about the Enneagram, I'm not talking about that like personality Enneagram thing. That's a different Enneagram thing. The Enneagram in manifesting is used differently than how they use the Enneagram in that personality thing. And then we have the law of attraction and the law of abundance. These universal laws are definitely important to start contemplating, to become spiritually awakened, in tune, attuned, and to live our best lives, to live happier and healthier. Because when we can start to understand how things exist on polarities, how they vibrate, how energy transmutes, we can transmute the energy in our own lives to live happier and healthier. All right, guys, thank you for joining me for another video. I promised all of those who reach out, or not who reach out, who reached out, that it won't be that long till my next video. I appreciate hearing from all of you and that you missed me. And as always, may the energies you serve you well. Let's keep making our way through, and I'll see you in the next one.